On Scenic Roots, this is Talking Writing. A week or so before Patty Griffin played in Chattanooga, that was at the end of April this year, I had the chance to talk to her on the phone. As you'll soon hear, she was in her kitchen while I was talking to her, doing the dishes, which is rather noisy over the telephone. But it was a much deeper and richer conversation than that setting might suggest to you. To get started, this is a song from her most recent album, which is a couple of years old now, the album called Patty Griffin. This is a song called The Wheel. So, at the risk of addressing what's swiftly becoming something of a cliche, how's it been for you in the pandemic?
Kind of dreary, nothing
yeah, I imagine.
Before. Yeah, it's been a little dreary. A lot like that for everyone else too, But,
well, that may be true, but one of the things that distinguishes you, obviously, from most of us, is that a lot of the work you do, you probably do by yourself anyway, right, when you're writing?
Yeah, I do, but I wasn't very inspired in this pandemic. I think that it was a very confusing time creatively. I think that we're in the midst of a lot of things happening in the world that, I don't know if it's my age or I'm not going to go so far as to say hopelessness set in, but I just wanted to make sure if I was going to write that I would have something very useful to do when I did that, and I was very confused about what that would be. I think it's particularly in the pandemic and the lockdown period of time, there were a lot of people expressing themselves about what their points of view were, and I didn't think I needed to add to that conversation at that time. So my writing has been not non-existent, but it hasn't been pouring out of me in a helpful way, to others. I think it's a really important time, and it's also a very downhearted time for so many reasons on the planet. And I was listening to this Ukrainian poet on NPR, and I don't even remember his name, but he was saying that, if you're a writer and a poet in the Ukraine, he said it almost feels like we need to invent words right now to create something else, because all the words are so used and exploited. I'm really going down the rabbit hole here for a little Chattanooga blurb, but you asked, so there you go. All of what you've said so far, amen. One of the things that comes to mind from what you were saying is the somewhat fraught relationship I have with social media, and that same notion that you were talking about. So many people have something to say, and yet it never feels to me as if I really want to get into or be part of that conversation, because at best, the conversations tend to be reactionary. So yeah.
if you're wanting to really add something to the conversation, to say something that hasn't been said already, offer a different perspective, that's a real challenge. But that's what you do. on your last record. I just took 3 songs because I know you probably don't even have time to talk about 3 songs, but it would give us something to talk about as regards what you do and how well you do it. So the song "The Wheel," for instance, when you transcribe it, it's essentially a verse.
Yeah. It's a bit of a chant, I think. I like that kind of groove, chant thing. Mm-hmm.
And yet, while... Okay, so it's a chant. And the
I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Well, the purpose of a chant, right, is to make a point by keep repeating it. And so that it goes deep into the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, wow, that there's a whole universe in that song.
All of these things that we keep creating our suffering about, they all ultimately connect to one, one thing connects to the other. And that's one of the things that I feel like is missing in social media in particular, and the way that people carry news to each other is context is really lost. It's all very reactionary expressions, to a situation, and waiting for that to set in. I do think that is going to set in, will set in, but I think also because social media is young, like maybe the oldest generation that's had it is in their 40s, for that most of their lives is in their 40s, and that's still young, to be able to bring context into it, and you have to think about the inventors of social media and how young they were when they were inventing it. They certainly weren't thinking about how we could really carefully carry wisdom in that communication, and the way that algorithms read you. There's nothing wise about that. It's all very, we're kind of stuck in junior high right now, I think, and that's from my point of view, that may be part of it. Is the way is because a lot of our communication with each other happens through these computers now.
I love the notion of being stuck in junior high. I think that really does nail it in some ways. It is. Oh God, who'd want to go back to junior high?
Well, I remember being in junior high and thinking, oh yeah, well one day I'll get out of here, and it's never really felt like I have,
Exactly.
Like stay in junior high,
So,
what would that be in the United Kingdom? I don't think you were in junior high. I think you were in what level is that in your country that you came from?
Yeah, they call it laughably. They call it senior school, and so you start that when you're 11, And so I had a measure of independence, and I thought that was really cool. And then I was swiftly disabused of that notion by the people teaching us.
Yeah.
But so talking about wanting to get away, do you have anything in common with? Is that a woman that's singing in the song "Where I Come From"?
That is my town that I grew up in.
Oh, it is?
Okay. Yeah, it is a description of the town that I grew up in, and so many other towns in the world. It's sort of. I think there's some positives to all those factories closing down, it gives the rivers a chance to recover in some places, hopefully. In Maine, where I grew up, at least when I was younger, there was a lot of effort that was put into cleaning rivers from all the industrial waste. And I think that some of that waste never gets cleaned, but it does manage to bring some life back to them. And we haven't really spent a lot of time, at least in this country. I was sort of born in this really small little window where it looked like civil rights were happening. People were paying attention. When I was a really little girl, the teacher took a poll of all the little girls in class and said, "Who here thinks women's liberation is a good idea?" And we all raised our hands. And by the time I was 17, the pushback against that had started, and nobody wanted to be a feminist, that I knew in my town. They had already been painted as sort of this unfeminine, loud, abrasive thing by, however, you know what I mean? We haven't really been focusing on day-to-day quality of life in my town where I grew up. It's sort of like that has been lost because all of the industry that was there that sustained the town shutting down, it creates traumas in families and destroys the town. And people, when I go through that town now, it looks like people have there's nobody left that I knew, but there are still, turns out. But people gave up on quality of life because they just feel really beaten down. And so that's sort of what the song is about,
as the day goes down.
My young colleague and I, for the last few months, have been trying to get a handle on writing about homelessness here in Chattanooga. And it's incredibly complicated. It's a complicated issue for everybody, but it's what you're talking about, and what they. One of the first comments that we got from people was that it's all about Maslow's hierarchy, and that until you take care of your basic needs, you can't really do anything else. There's no place for higher thinking, because you're spending all your time thinking about how you're going to survive in terms of shelter and something to eat. If you are in a town, and this is your hometown, and the industries that sustain the hometown collapse, what happens then?
But there are also industries that destroyed the environment too. So there's that. We've got families that came into these territories hundreds of years ago in North America and all over the world. That's where I'm from, and just plundered and plundered, and that's sort of the model. You know what I wondered? Here's a thought now that you've brought up homelessness. I've been wondering this. It would be really interesting to somebody tally up the tax records of people who are currently homeless, that when they had income, and what they contributed tax-wise to this country, what the amount of money that they were putting in to their taxes. And there's two reasons why I want to know that. One is, what are we missing now? And the second is, how come they don't get services for all the money they put into this country?
What a great question.
What I mean?
I do know exactly what you mean. There's a guy right now proposing a bill in Tennessee that makes it a felony to put a tent up on public land.
Yeah.
And somebody called him on it and said, well, it looks to me like you're trying to criminalize people because they're homeless. And he says, oh, no, we're not trying to criminalize them. It's like, of course you are. Of course you are. That's exactly what you're trying to do. It's as if politicians regard homeless people as just a problem that they have no idea how to solve, so they just want to shunt it away.
Yeah.
All of which, in a kind of convoluted way that is the way my mind works, brings us to the boys of Tralee. And it's what you were saying before, really, about, the people who came here. I read a novel about that, about people who were logging in the early part of the last century. And, their rapacious approach to it, they just basically stripped the land of all these beautiful old trees.
Yeah.
The boys from Tralee, those were the ancestors of those people we're talking about, I guess, aren't they?
Yeah.
Why did you want to write about them?
Well, my father is Irish. His grandparents, my grandparents, his parents are from Dingle. Dingle doesn't really sound great in a song, so Tralee was a little better. And they're much later, maybe, two generations out of that, that situation, but they were still, really completely poverty-stricken and lived tragic lives, for the most part because of, the political situation there for Irish Catholics, So they, I'm from that brood with my father, and it's definitely shaped me and shapes the way I see the world. Is being the second generation American, from Ireland, and when I go to Ireland, there's a certain way that I can pick up a conversation with people that is completely familiar to me. And it makes me know that I am more Irish than I think, And they're very aware of, especially in the West, there's a social justice awareness of just like part of the DNA, you know. I think that I was raised by people like that. And the interesting thing is that the Irish in this country, I think they arrived, I would say 85 to 90% arrived completely traumatized by poverty. But it went both ways. You know, they're some of the worst criminals at the highest levels of this country and this history that are Irish American. And also, you know, some of the most amazing artists, writers, you know, everything else too. So, but they don't have a great reputation in this country as far as race relations go and all that sort of thing. So I think that, you know, the song's kind of just about carrying trauma through the generations, and, you know, me sort of looking at the meat and potatoes of it, you know. I didn't mean to put potatoes in there like that. But,
well, you know, somebody said recently, and of course it's hardly an original thought, that so many of the problems in the country at the moment are essentially tribal. And the Irish people in this country, I think, much like I have quite a lot of experience with Irish people growing up, because most of the kids I went to school with were Irish. When I moved to New York, many of the people I met and worked with were Jewish, and there's a lot of similarities. They're very insular, you know, and because they're protecting themselves, they're protecting each other.
Right.
They spent generations being outsiders in this country, so it's kind of understandable why they would be somewhat suspicious of anyone outside of their immediate circle.
Yeah. I think my father definitely had that. I mean, he tried very much to be the lighthearted, easygoing guy, but it really fell flat. He did not have that in him. He was really very guarded. And I think, you know, it just, life is going to bring you something traumatic anyway. So he lived a very difficult life, and, you know, never got out from underneath what he was born into. You know, I think that definitely a classic Irish tragedy. In this country also, you know, I think one of the things that's happening in our country, and I can't speak about the world, but we are having an awakening, and as painful as it is, it's also empowering to really dig into the history of slavery here and race and part in it. And the Irish have a long history of being abusive towards Black African Americans, and but I think one of the things that was really striking to know is that the very first famine Irish boat that arrived in the United States arrived in New Orleans, and they were dying literally. They were already very ill, but there were people on the boat who needed to work immediately, so they were taken off the boat, taken straight into the swamps to fill in the swamps because they didn't want to waste their slave labor on the swamps. And they let the Irish get the mosquito bites and die of malaria and saved their property, African Americans, from dying. And that's really interesting. That's something that every person in America who's from immigrant stock can really look at. And, you know, it shook something inside of me to hear that. Because I've always felt a little guilty, even though my father and my mother are very aware of civil rights and gung-ho about all that stuff, very liberal people. I've been a little wary of my Irishness around Black people, what they must think of me as a result. And, you know, I think that it's a really brutal, when you commodify every single thing, and that's your basis for a nation, then that shit's going to happen and keep happening. And I think the awareness of that is really we're starting to wake up. I didn't really want to know that about my country, and I do. There are a lot of great things about America, but they don't have a lot to do with that.
Everything you came for, riding on the ground. Judas had for money, and as we had none, all the world around us came tumbling down. Poor boys from Chile going to a factory in a place of foreign men called Ontario. Poor boys from Chile, 40 days out on the sea without home and family. Nowhere left to go. One morning our boy Tommy lay dying beside me, holding sick and dying, and blue is what we found. Before he took his last breath, the ship's sailors found him. Before he took his last breath, they tossed him into drown. If hunger makes you nothing, then I am nothing. Just another hungry boy washed upon the sand. Lucky boys who did survive cruel deeds of cruel men will live a short and lonely life in a foreign land. Poor boys from Chile going to a factory in a place of foreign men called Ontario. Poor boys from Chile, 40 days out on the sea. One of them four boys was me. I wanted you to know.
I'm curious, you've talked so much about the immigrant experience. Did it feel like you were an immigrant when you moved from Maine to Texas?
I think that, that immigrant experience goes on into the next generation. One of the things that we do, and part of that is connected back to where I come from. I mean, that one of the things that I don't think people have really talked about or given, so I've never heard it given a lot of attention, but this massive migration out of all these little towns that dried up because industry dried up or moved to China. Industry didn't dry up, it just became people who owned the industry wanted to make more money, so they moved it somewhere else where they could break all the rules and make a lot of money and not have unions to deal with and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That created not only these little towns with people left there that are at loose ends, but it also sent the rest of us out into the world, and we do feel like immigrants. Yeah, we do feel like we're trying to find our little thing to stick to. And you're a little outside all the time. I mean, maybe everybody feels that way in the world all the time anyway, no matter what. But I remember as a child, my mom's family they're French, the old French, and that was their region for 400 years when I was born there. And so, and also it's indigenous. There's indigenous in my mother's line, and, it goes back farther than that. So that was definitely home as a child, and it felt like people around me were related to my mother and that sort of thing. And I no longer have that as a result of choices that were made about maximizing business potential, and that's exactly how the famine happened. So I think it's right now. I'm sort of looking at everything and wondering how can we all sort of all of us who have how do you organize power among just regular people? That's never been done. And I think that nothing less than that is going to keep our species going, really. And but I don't really know how that is going to look, because it seems like the power brokers always win everything. And I'm just really going off on a tangent now, but
not really. I think I would tend to agree with you. I don't know. I'm not sure where we go from there in terms of that kind of situation. Because it's very difficult, as you know, it's almost impossible to militate against power. But then, take something like Charles Dickens, he managed to do it. He found a way. He was a writer, as you are. And it seems to me that in many ways, perhaps your impulse as a writer is to address issues like that.
It has been, yeah. It has been.
Do you still feel that way? Do you still feel moved to write like that?
I think right now I'm moved to sing things that bring more comfort, and because I think there's a lot of that. Right now we're getting ready to leave on tour, and I would say it's not lighter or anything, but it's a little more comforting. The things that I'm interested in working on, and I think it's because there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of pain, and people. I personally feel very, very exhausted by the constant barrage of I feel like my compassion is not necessarily always present when I'm hearing another person's story about why that's important to them, why this is very important to them because of their experience. And I think it's not because I don't care, it's because there's just so much of it. So I think that kept me from personalizing that and keeping and writing like that. There's a lot, and there's probably a lot out there that's already been written that's a lot better than what I could write. So I think it's, I don't know, I'm figuring out, I'm also going to be 60 in a couple of years, and that changes the game. I think there's something from that point of view that I'm still figuring out. Like your 50s is sort of like the puberty of late adulthood. It's like you're 13 years old for 10 years.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I never really looked at it like that. I'm 70 years old, and so
you're in the adolescence.
The sobering thing about it is it's what Joni Mitchell wrote about. You think you know, but you don't really know. It's all illusions. And those illusions become ever more apparent as you get older, I think.
Yeah. And how do you explain that? Like everything that you might, it's hard. It's tricky to write about things like that because it gets to sound really, really cryptic. And I've guilty as charged. I've got a few of those out there, but that's what they feel. That's what this feels like to me. It's very surreal, but it's magical too. So as you get older, it's easier to appreciate things that you might have missed when you had.
I think in some ways, to be honest, I think in some ways joy is easier to identify.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. You looking forward to the tour?
I am. We've got. I was just in Chattanooga, so I'm surprised to see it back on the list, and I'm very excited. It's a beautiful little place, and I'm looking forward to it. it's really fun to play right now. I think people, my experience of playing out has been that people are more tuned in than before. You know, they have been cooped up and ready to listen and go out and see live music. So
I think you're absolutely right. There's an incredible energy in the air at the moment. Everybody, you know, has got all this pent up whatever ambitions they had,
right.
You know, whatever they wanted to do, and it's all sort of bursting like a dam, you know.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to you coming.
Well, thanks so much for.
I'd love to talk to you more sometime. It's fun talking to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
I hope the tour goes well.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. If you're interested in hearing more of that conversation with Patty Griffin, it will be on the radio station website, wutc.org, by sometime tomorrow. Patty Griffin has a new collection of songs set for release on Friday, June 10th, called Tape. It came together when Patty began digging through some recordings she'd made on, as she put it, cheap home recording applications. About the collection, she wrote, "These songs have a feel you can only get when you are by yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning. My home recordings are almost always my favourite recordings, and I feel better getting some true rarities out there." On Scenic Roots, this is Talking Writing on listener-supported public radio in Chattanooga.